chapter of the MESILAT YESHARIM, and it's so wonderful and beautiful because zehirut is to be careful, not to sin. And chametz, right? Ethan, we have to be careful not to, when we make matzah, we have to make sure that it doesn't become chametz. And also, we have to do bedikah to make sure that there's no chametz in our jurisdiction. So he says, he says, if you want to be zehirut, so basically, my Rosh Hashiva explained that a Jew cannot live without these two midot. You can't be a servant of Hashem if you don't have the first two midot of the MESILAT YESHARIM. You know what they are? Zehirut is to be careful not to sin, but he's going to go very deep into it. And the second one is zerizut. Zerizut is to run towards a mitzvah. So he says, what is zehirut really mean? He says the first step is sheitponen ma hatov amiti shevchor adam. First, we have to define what is a mitzvah, right? Unfortunately, liberals today think it's a mitzvah from making a boy into a girl and girl into a boy, right? Just whatever you think is a mitzvah is not really what? A mitzvah. So Rav Matasyahu Solomon, that we're using his MESILAT YESHARIM, he goes and explains that's why it's so important to learn the details of halacha, right? Because first of all, we have to define what's good. So let's say tefillin, right? It's obviously good to put tefillin, but if you put it here, or let's go deeper. It's never good to say lashon hara, but sometimes if it's a shidduch and you know the guy's a faker and he's really gonna do what? If he gets married to the girl, he's gonna be a drug dealer. You know, just because a person has long payas and a black hat doesn't mean he's a good person. There's a lot of fake people out there. So if you don't learn halacha, Rav Matasyahu says this is what the Ramchal means. You have to first define exactly what good is, and you can't define exactly what good is unless you do what? You learn halacha. And I want to give credit to Rav Blineder, probably the most important class I'm going to give it, because I had a few, it's something very passionate to my heart. The real way to learn Torah is not to just learn Gemara. You know that, Ethan? You always have to bring it lahalacha v'lamaaseh. Always, all the Gedolim, when they used to learn, that's why the Rif or the Rambam is not just learning and asking questions. Always, we have to get to the halachic conclusion. So that's what the Rav Matasyahu says. And the second thing is, so the first part is we have to define what's good and what's bad. And the devil is in the details. Halacha is a small difference in scenario makes the halacha totally different, right? For example, lashon hara, we just learned in Daf Yomi, somebody that says lashon hara, you have to throw him to the dogs. He's written that the wild dog should eat him. But if the reason you're saying lashon hara is lo tamod al damrecha, it has a beneficial motive because you want to spare somebody else's from harm, then not only is it not a sin, it's a sin if you don't say lashon hara, right? That's one of the great rabbis in Vilna used to say. He says the tragedy of lashon hara is when people should say it, they don't say it. When they shouldn't be saying it, they say it. So that's what the Ramchal says. You have to define exactly what's good, because if you can't do that, Rav Matasyahu Solomon says, without learning halacha. The second thing is you have to look internally, right? You have to look inside your actions and say, do your actions shtim? Right? So once we define what's good, then you have to look at yourself and say, do I mirror what's good or bad? Right? Because if what's good and bad is X and Y, but you're doing Z, then what you're doing is not good, right? So you always have to self-look. So he says this is both before you do speak and after, right? Sof ma'aseh v'machshava techila, which means before we're about to say something, right, or go do something specific, we have to be very careful to make sure what we're doing is what? Kosher, you know? But afterwards, maybe what we did wasn't kosher. right? Because we human beings are not perfect. So you have to do a cheshbon and nefesh before and after. So what the Ramchal is saying is something so important. We have to be so sensitive. And I want to say a big chidush on this. I was thinking about this. I want to say beautiful chidush. When we learn Musar, it comes out like this. The worst possible thing the Ramchal says is if a person lives his life on autopilot, right? You just do because everybody else is doing it. What you do today is just because you did it yesterday, right? So if yesterday you said Lashon Hara, yesterday you were lazy, yesterday you were not being a good servant of Hashem, he said the worst possible thing in life is to live your life just because out of habit, not because something is good or bad. You get what I'm saying? So he says like this. He says, I wanted to say Chiddush like this. What does it mean? We're created in the image of Hashem, right? Does Hashem create anything randomly? Do anything randomly? Hashem is very, what? Hashem is very specific in what he does. So therefore, since we have a neshama, we can't just do things randomly out of habit because other people are doing it. We have to think it through. He says, Zehirut is really being thoughtful. Before you do something and even after, you should review your day before you go to sleep and say, hey, was I really thoughtful? And it says, he said, just like our life is more precious than the most silver and diamonds, right? So just like you very precise in how you measure gold and silver and platinum, your life also. You have to be very exact. What you're doing is at 100% what? The right thing. Sometimes even if you try, what the Ramchal is saying, the Chiddush is like this. Let's say I'm a very deliberate person and thoughtful. Even under such circumstances, you could make a mistake and you're not doing it exactly right. You aren't 100% kosher. That's why you need to do hitbonenut, zehirut, at the end of the week, at the end of the day, right? To review what you did. And by the way, that's why it's very good to have a good wife and a good friend. You know why? Because a lot of times we're blind to our own mistakes. And he says over here that so he says once you define what you're doing is good, right? You thought it through before you did it and after you did it, then keep on doing that good thing again and again. And be mechazek in it. And if chas v'shalom, through your auditing yourself and thoughtfulness, you saw something that you did wasn't kosher, then you have to use every trick and method under your sleeve to run away from it and become pure from it. And that's what the Gemara says in Erubin, Ethan. The Gemara in Erubin says, the Gemara comes to a conclusion, it was better for a person not to be created. You know that? Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel were arguing for 2.5 years. Is it better for the world to be created or not? Finally, Bet Hillel agreed to Bet Shammai that it's better for the world not to be created because there's so much sin, right? For every 100 people in Vegas, how many people are in the Bet Midrash? For every 100 people on spring break right now in Florida and Cancun, how many people are Jewish? I'm saying, let's say Jewish. Out of the 15 million Jews, out of the 100 Jews that go to right now are in Cancun or on different spring break. So it says, but the Gemara says, at least now, it really was better not to be created. But at least now you should be yepashpish b'maasav and yemashpish b'maasav. You should do what we just said. You should look through your actions and audit them. Make sure that they're kosher. So he says these two things. He says, first of all, you have to look before you do something. Think it through, right? Like I want to say, even parenthetically, you know why your Rebbe was learning MESILAT YESHARIM so much? When I was in the Mir, I said this at the beginning of this year. There was somebody in Elulzman, he learned MESILAT YESHARIM. So he went to Rav Wolbe, Zatzal. His picture's right there. He went to Rav Wolbe. This is Rav Wolbe, people, in case you wanted to see. So he went to Rav Wolbe, and he asked, I finished MESILAT YESHARIM, in the the Aser Semei Tshuva. He was learning it very stark, I guess, and the 40 days, Elul Zman is around 40 days. So he said, should I go do something else? Rav Wolbe told him, you have to learn it 40 times. On the 41st time, it's going to start to affect you. So that's the thing, that you have to look through your actions, and if they're not good, guess what? We're so lucky we're learning this right before Pesach. You know why? Look what the Ramchal writes in his language. Ki kol asher yimatzeh me'ele yivarem min ha'olam. Once you audit yourself and you find something that you're doing is not kosher, like you have kas, right? You're lazy, you say lashon hara, then you need to burn it like you burn chametz. That's why, according to halacha, we could throw our chametz in the water, right? Feed it to the ocean fish. But why do we burn it? Because it's the symbol of evil. Just like we have to burn chametz like we burn our bad midot. So he says, again he says, Ethan, again, going back to the idea that we're in the image of Hashem, just like Hashem is perfect, we too can be perfect. So anything that's imperfection, again, the Ramchal used the lashon of biur, right? You have to burn it and eradicate it out of the thing. And then the Gemara says, yemashmesh b'masav, right? Yemashmesh means, even if you're doing something good, right? That also you could audit yourself. You know why? You could always do it for a better reason. Like some people, they learn shalosh l'shem shamayim. So even your good actions, there's a way of going deeper into them and doing it l'shem shamayim. We wish everybody a very happy and healthy Passover. And just like we learned in the MESILAT YESHARIM today, the ultimate hagala and biur of chametz is the chametz that's within. The chametz in our actions, when we burn it, then Hashem will be very proud of us. Amen.